Hi, welcome to History Doodles. My name's Mitch. Today we're going to be talking about the first big conflict between the Persians and the Greeks, called the Ionian Revolt. Specifically about one man's part in it named Aristagoras. So without further ado, let's get into it. Thousands of years ago, this coastal strip of land in Asia Minor was populated by Greeks, specifically Ionian Greeks. And these people had more in common culturally with the people in the islands of the Aegean, in the mainland of Greece, than with the people living in the rest of this region, which is Turkey to us today. In around 500 BC, these Ionian Greeks were living in city-states that recently had fallen under the control of the Persian Empire. Now, the Persians had way too large of an empire to control everything directly, and communication between the regions of the empire often took months. So a local governor, or a satrap, was set up in each of these regions to manage the area and report up to the king of Persia, who at the time was a man named Darius. The satrap that the Ionian Greeks were ruled under had his capital in Sardis. This guy was the king's brother. His name was Aristagoras. And one level below him were individual tyrants who ruled over small city-states. These tyrants were basically unelected local strongmen. And through modern eyes, these people seemed like mob bosses who extracted what they could out of local populations and forced their rule on their population with small armies under their pay. So under this government structure, the Ionian people were understandably disgruntled. They were especially pissed because they had to pay a tremendous amount of their money in tribute, and they had to contribute their sons to the Persian army. This area was a powder keg. Kind of like the Balkans in World War I, there would be a butterfly effect in this area that dragged countless lives into a bloody war. And it all started when the nephew and son-in-law of one of these tyrants had a bright idea. This guy was named Aristagoras, and his uncle was named Histories. And they were a family in this town called Miletus. Now, Aristagoras had a little bit of power because of his family's domination over the city, but he wanted a bigger slice of control in the Mediterranean. And one day, in Miletus, a bunch of aristocrats from a nearby island of Naxos showed up, seeking help. They had been exiled from Naxos by the local population, and they met with Aristagoras, who at the time was acting as a deputy governor. And they asked him for help putting them back in power. Aristagoras saw this as an opportunity to become a tyrant himself, and he started formulating a plan to take over Naxos and then use the island as a jumping-off point for Persian control in the rest of these Cyclades islands, and eventually the Greek mainland itself. So Aristagoras went over to the satrap Aristagoras to pitch his idea, and he promised land, slaves, and money if he could just get 100 Persian ships and a military to invade Naxos. Aristagoras loved the idea, and he even doubled the total of ships to 200. And then he sent a messenger to Susa to get a thumbs up from his brother, the king, Darius, on this whole operation. And so next thing you know, Aristagoras has a Persian army and a navy at his disposal to go invade Naxos. But he also had the company of a Persian member of the Achaemenid royal family with him to oversee these operations. This man was called Megabates. So once this operation began, they had to delay a bit on a nearby island because of bad weather. And during this waiting period, Aristagoras got into a tiff with Megabates. And it was over the treatment of a captain under Megabates' command. The details around this debate are along the lines that Aristagoras thought Megabates was being a dick and punishing this captain for no reason, and Megabates thought Aristagoras was interfering with his command. Sources differ on these details, but in the most common version of the story, the next thing is Megabates was so mad about this argument that he sent a messenger to warn the Naxians of the incoming invasion. He reasoned that if he sabotaged the plan, he could blame Aristagoras for the failure, and then he would look stupid in front of the king. So either way, the Naxians got word of the invasion, and they built up better defenses, increased their supply of food and water, and made it basically impossible to unseat them from their city. The element of surprise was lost, and the mission was a total failure. 4 months later, the Persian force had to turn back home with their tail between their legs. And immediately people started pointing fingers, and Aristagoras went into a panic. He, rightfully, started to think that he would be punished for the failure of the mission. So he doubled down, and he hatched another plan. He went to the people of Miletus and the surrounding cities, and he told them that they should rid themselves of tyrants altogether, and that they needed to revolt against the Persian Empire and govern themselves. This guy who 10 minutes ago was trying to invade an island and become a tyrant, all of a sudden started acting like George Washington. and miraculously, people bought it. And next thing is, a league was formed with a board of elected generals with the goal of independence. And Aristagoras is at the front of this charge, and he sets off to other islands seeking help for his cause. So as the revolt is spreading, he goes to Sparta to ask them for aid. And he meets with one of their kings, named Cleomenes. Cleomenes didn't like the idea, and he told Aristagoras to fuck off, and he was probably busy with his military training and making love to his friends. So Aristagoras then goes to Athens, and they were more receptive. They had already been hated by the Persian for some time, for overthrowing their tyrants and trying out this radical concept of democracy. The Athenians chipped in 20 triremes to the cause, which is not a huge number, but anything helps when you're trying to fight against the most powerful kingdom in your region. The next stage of the revolt culminates with a bunch of pissed off Ionians landing at a town called Ephesus. They gathered there to launch a surprise attack against Sardis, and it caught Artaxerxes and the Persians totally off guard. Most of the Persian military was off fighting elsewhere, so the Ionians were able to take the suburbs surrounding the city and force Artaxerxes into a citadel, while the Greeks went on a rampage. The lower city was set ablaze, and by the time the Persian forces were able to come help, the Greeks had already turned around back towards their ships. However, they were caught in their retreat, and the battle at Ephesus took place, which led to a heavy casualty toll for the Ionians. The survivors went back to their boats. News of these incidents made their way to the king Darius, who demanded action from Histiaeus and Artaxerxes to get things back under control. And with a renewed vigor for the cause, it was only a matter of time before they came down and put the Ionians into their place. The Athenians, sensing that this was going to get bad quickly, sailed back home, and they bailed on the Ionians, who would continue to fight on. Next, the revolt spreads to Cyprus and Byzantium and Caria, but the Persians are stomping out the rebellion very harshly wherever they could. And despite starting this whole thing, Aristagoras could see the writing on the wall that this wouldn't last forever, and so he wanted out. Being the scheming coward that he was, he decided to hatch a third plan, and this plan would end in even more disaster than the previous two. He wanted to take some of his men and sail to Thrace, a wild territory that the Persians had recently been fighting in against the Scythians. And so he handed over the keys of Miletus to a guy named Pythagoras, and he went on a strategic retreat with whoever wanted to join him. Soon after he showed up in Thrace, he started causing trouble. The native population didn't take too kindly to his arrival, and they wanted Aristagoras and his posse out. We are told that he died besieging a city in the area, and don't have many details past that point. But all in all, the man who started a conflict that was spreading all across the Mediterranean died a failed rebel in some far-off land, trying to escape the consequences of his actions. And back in Ionia, the revolt continued to spread, and fighting went on until 494, when the Persian army and navy gathered to fight the Ionians at Lade, a small island across the coast of Miletus. The resulting battle, the battle at Lade, was never really a fair fight. You see, the Persians were so successful as an empire because they were just as good at negotiations and bribery and backroom dealings as they were at fighting, and they were excellent fighters. In this case, they sent out bribes to the former tyrants of the Ionian cities who had gathered to fight, and a few of these bribes were successful. And when the Ionians sailed out to meet the Persians in battle, before the two navies met, the ships from the Ionian islands of Samos and Lesbos turned around and went home. They had taken the bribe and left their former allies to die. This whole episode, though a total failure, sticks in our history books because of the participation of the Athenians. This rebel city had really pissed off the king Darius, who, according to Herodotus, ever afterwards had a special reminder given to him about what they had done. In Herodotus' words, quote, "Then he had one of his servants every day, when his dinner was served, to repeat to him 3 times the words, 'Master, remember the Athenians.'" End quote. Darius was now on a mission to destroy the pesky Greeks who had dared to stand against the king, and he started mobilizing thousands of men to go take them out. And that fight, resulting in the legendary Battle of Marathon, is what I'll talk about next time. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope you learned something and had a good time along the way. I'll see you next time.